You know, for many years, you have prayed, you have asked, you have pleaded with God to change the circumstances of your life. You have gone to God with the sincerity of your heart, believing that if only you could reach Him, if only you could find the right words, the right formula, the right degree of faith, something in the outer world would shift. And yet, in the quiet moments of honesty, you recognize that much of what you have sought has not appeared. Healing has tarried. Supply has delayed. Peace has remained just out of reach. And so the mind begins to question, why is God silent? Why is there no response to my earnest calling? But I say to you, the silence is not an absence of God. It is the absence of correct approach. Not because you have done something wrong, but because for centuries humanity has been taught to look outward, to pray outward, to seek outward for that which is already the reality of their own being. We will begin here at the very heart of the misunderstanding that has burdened the human race. For all this time, we have gone to God as though He were somewhere else, as though His presence were at a distance, as though we must reach up toward a far-off heaven to receive what we believe ourselves to lack. And so we beg, we petition, we try to convince God to intervene in human affairs. But the moment you approach God as a being who must be called, awakened, persuaded, or moved, you have unknowingly placed yourself outside the kingdom. You have assumed separation, and from that assumption, all unanswered prayer is born. You have been asking God to fix your life, and nothing has changed because the God to whom you have been praying is not the God who indwells. The God who indwells is not a power to be summoned. He is the very substance of your own consciousness. The presence you seek is not coming from above, it is emerging from within. And until this truth is recognized, not merely believed, not argued, not accepted intellectually, but recognized, prayer remains an act of reaching outward toward an imagined deity instead of resting in union with the one who has never left your being. So let us begin anew. Let us set aside all the old modes of prayer, all the beliefs that God can be influenced or persuaded, all the anxiety that drives us to ask for things. Let us approach the spiritual life from a higher standpoint. For the truth is this: nothing in your outer world can change permanently while you continue to pray from the standpoint of separation. It is not that God has withheld an answer. It is that you have been asking the wrong question. And when this becomes clear, when you see that your seeking has always been outward, while the kingdom has always been inward, then a great shift occurs. An inner stillness arises. The struggle ends. And you discover that what you have been looking for is already the truth of your being, awaiting only your recognition. Let us move deeper now into the principle that lies at the root of unanswered prayer, the principle Joel Goldsmith identified as seeking second. You will find this to be one of the most liberating recognitions of your spiritual life, for it explains why so much earnest petition, so much sincere religious activity, has produced so little lasting spiritual fruit. Seeking second means this: you place the material situation first, the condition first, the appearance first, and then, after declaring its power over you, you ask God to help you overcome it. In that very moment, without realizing it, you have invested all reality, all authority, all substance in the problem itself, and you have diminished the divine presence to a role of secondary response. You have reversed the order of spiritual law. The human mind says, here is my illness, here is my lack, here is my fear. God, please come fix these things. But the truth is, the moment you approach God with a problem, you are not worshiping God, you are worshiping the problem. By fearing it, you empower it. By describing it, you affirm it. By treating it, you acknowledge it as real power. And the more real it becomes in your consciousness, the more firmly it takes shape in your experience. This is the tragic irony of human spirituality. The harder one fights the problem, the more one enthrones it. What does it mean to seek second? It means you believe the outer world to be cause and the inner presence to be effect. It means you assume the circumstance has already established itself as fact, and consciousness is merely a tool you hope will undo it. You have placed the material first and the spiritual last. You have accepted appearance as truth and presence as remedy. And my friends, as long as you operate in this inversion, you will find yourself running tirelessly in circles, praying to change shadows while ignoring the light from which they arise. The Master said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, not second, not after the problem is analyzed, not after fear has flooded the mind, not after the bank statement has been read or the diagnosis delivered. Seek first, before any reaction, before any interpretation, before allowing the mind to grant power where no power exists. For seeking first is the recognition that God, the infinite, invisible, is the only reality, the only law, the only power. And when this recognition precedes the problem dissolves in the light of truth. So long as you continue to put the world before the Spirit cannot reveal itself as the harmony of your experience. Not because God withholds anything, but because consciousness cannot serve two masters. You cannot fear an appearance and at the same moment recognize the presence that nullifies it. You cannot declare that a condition has power and then expect the realization of a God who is all power. You cannot place matter first and spirit second and hope to experience the law of spiritual harmony. Consciousness will always reflect the order you establish. And so I say to you gently, if you have been praying for change while trembling before the problem, you have been seeking second. If your first instinct has been fear, analysis, planning, or pleading, you have been seeking second. If you have allowed the world to define reality before turning to presence, you have been seeking second. But take heart, this is not failure, it is simply conditioning. And the moment you recognize it, the moment you begin to reverse the sequence of your inner life, the entire spiritual landscape shifts. You are awakening to the understanding that the kingdom must be sought first, not as ritual, not as obligation, but as the simple recognition that God is the only power there is, and therefore nothing in the world has authority over your being. This recognition opens the way for the truth that has always been present to reveal itself. Let us now turn to a truth so simple, so fundamental, that the entire weight of spiritual confusion collapses the moment it is understood. The Master said, "The kingdom of God is within you." For 2,000 years, this statement has been repeated, memorized, sung, engraved in stone, and yet its meaning has rarely been grasped. Humanity has continued to imagine a distant kingdom, a future kingdom, a heavenly kingdom awaiting us beyond the grave or granted as a reward for obedience. But I tell you, the kingdom of God is not a location, not a condition bestowed upon you, not an attainment reserved for the worthy. The kingdom of God is a state of consciousness, and consciousness is always here, always now, always your own. You see, the moment you treat the kingdom as a destination, you postpone it. The moment you treat it as a prize, you disqualify yourself from it. The moment you imagine it as something external, you bind yourself to separation. But when you understand that the kingdom is the awareness of God within you, then you see that nothing can withhold it from you, nothing can delay it, nothing can stand between you and the realization of your own divine heritage. The kingdom is not reached through effort. It is revealed through recognition. It is not something added to your life. It is the truth underlying your life. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is the nature of your being. And the only reason it has felt distant is that you have been taught to look outward when the Master pointed inward. You have been taught to pray to a God above when the Christ revealed a God within. You have been taught to seek divine intervention when the kingdom is the divine presence already functioning as your consciousness. Joel Goldsmith discovered, through years of deep silence and inner listening, that God is not a power outside the human experience. God is not a force waiting to be summoned or persuaded. God is the living presence at the center of your being, the spiritual essence from which your life flows. And the kingdom is the awareness of this presence. To seek the kingdom, then, is not to try to reach God. It is to become aware of the God who has never left you. When you meditate, when you sit in stillness without asking, without pleading, without pursuing outcomes, something remarkable happens. A quiet realization dawns. The presence you are seeking is the witness within you, the consciousness that observes, the stillness beneath thought. And as you recognize this, the sense of separation dissolves. The kingdom is no longer a hope, it becomes an experience. It is no longer a promise, it is a living reality. And what follows this recognition is profound. You no longer look to the outer world for peace, for supply, for healing, for direction. You no longer depend upon the shifting circumstances of human experience. Instead, you rest in the understanding that God is the source, the substance, and the activity of your being, and that the outer world is but the expression of inner realization. This is why all spiritual masters have insisted that consciousness is the foundation of life. For the moment you discover the kingdom within, the outer world begins to align with the truth you have recognized. Let us be clear. The kingdom is not a future event. It is not waiting to appear when conditions are right. It is the eternal presence of God in you, as you, expressing through you. And this truth becomes visible the moment you stop seeking God in the world and begin recognizing God in consciousness. When you cease asking and begin acknowledging, when you cease striving and begin resting, when you cease treating and begin recognizing, the kingdom stands revealed in the only place it has ever been within you, as the very light of your being. Now that we have established that the kingdom is a state of consciousness and not a distant reward, we must understand why the long, weary path of asking God to fix our lives has borne so little fruit. This is not because God has been inattentive, nor because he has withheld anything, nor because you have been unworthy or insufficient in your prayers. No, none of these are the cause. The true reason is far simpler. The moment you ask God to change an external condition, you have already accepted that condition as real power. And when you treat an appearance as reality, you bind yourself to the appearance you hope to escape. Let us look at this plainly. When you say, God, heal this body, you are declaring that there is a power called disease which God must come and overcome. When you say, God, supply my need, you are acknowledging lack as an established fact which requires divine intervention. When you say, God, protect me from danger, you are affirming danger as a force that can threaten you. And as long as you live from this standpoint, granting power to appearances, your prayer cannot be answered because your consciousness has already enthroned the problem. Joel Goldsmith said often, the moment you fear an appearance, you have given it the only power it has. And likewise, the moment you ask God to remove an appearance, you have consented to its reality. Prayer, in the human sense, becomes a battle between two powers, the power of the condition and the hoped-for power of God. But God does not function as a power to overcome. God is not in the business of destroying disease, erasing lack, or correcting the world's conditions. God is the spiritual essence that reveals there is no power in the appearance to begin with. So long as you believe that God must act upon conditions, you remain in the dualistic world, the world of two powers, good and evil, truth and error, God and problem. But spiritual life begins only when you rise above this duality and see that there is only one power, one presence, one life, one substance, one reality, and that reality is God. When this is recognized, appearances lose their seeming authority and harmony begins to unfold without struggle. Understand this. Asking God to fix an issue makes God a servant of the problem. It implies that the appearance speaks first and God responds second. But spiritual law does not function this way. The infinite invisible does not react. God does not come and go. God does not mend what is broken in appearance. God reveals what has always been true behind the appearance. This is why so many have prayed fervently and found no lasting change. They prayed from fear. They prayed from belief in two powers. They prayed to alter shadows rather than to recognize the light. They prayed to change the picture on the screen rather than awakening to the fact that the screen itself is untouched, unaltered, perfect. When you understand that prayer is not an attempt to persuade God to act, but a willingness to recognize the presence already functioning, everything changes. When you cease asking and begin acknowledging, when you cease pleading and begin resting, when you cease describing the problem and begin realizing the truth, then prayer becomes effective not because God suddenly responds, but because you have withdrawn your faith from the appearance and returned it to the infinite presence. Do not be discouraged if this feels unfamiliar. You are undoing centuries of habit, but as you begin to see that God does not operate in the realm of changing conditions, you will discover a new form of prayer, one that does not beg, does not strive, does not fear, and does not attempt to make something happen. A prayer that recognizes God as the only reality, and in that recognition, the false appearance dissolves like mist in the presence of the sun. Now we come to a sacred point in our journey, a turning point so profound that once you cross it, your entire spiritual life changes direction. This is the moment when prayer ceases to be a request and becomes a recognition. When you stop asking God to act and begin acknowledging God as the only presence that already is, when you no longer look outward to a power that intervenes, but inward to a presence that expresses, this is the transition from human seeking to spiritual awareness. It is the point at which your prayers begin to bear fruit, not because God has suddenly begun to respond, but because you have aligned yourself with truth. Let us examine what it means to recognize rather than request. When you request, you believe something is missing. When you recognize, you know nothing can be missing from the fullness of divine presence. When you request, you believe God must give you something. When you recognize, you understand God is the something itself, the substance of every form, the life of every expression. When you request, you affirm lack. When you recognize, you acknowledge completeness. This is why Goldsmith said that one moment of realized truth is more powerful than years of petitionary prayer. Recognition is not an act of will. It is not a mental effort to convince yourself of spiritual ideas. It is simply the quiet turning of awareness toward what is already true. It is the inward statement, gentle, unforced, God is here. It is the breath of realization that says, the presence that I am seeking is the very presence of my own being. It is the remembrance that God is not a visitor, but the ground of consciousness itself. Recognition is the mystical opening through which truth shines of its own accord. Joel Goldsmith described recognition as beholding the truth, not declaring it, not affirming it repeatedly in an attempt to imprint it upon the mind, but beholding it, letting it reveal itself as if a veil quietly lifts. For the truth does not need your effort to make it true. It needs only your willingness to perceive it. And what is it that we recognize? We recognize that God is the only power. We recognize that spirit is the only substance. We recognize that life is infinite and whole. We recognize that the same presence that animated the prophets, the teachers, the mystics, is the presence that animates you. We recognize that the kingdom is not something we hope to achieve, but something we awaken to. This recognition removes the need for God to fix anything, for God is not a repairman of appearances. God is the truth behind appearances, and the moment truth is recognized, the appearance changes of itself. Imagine, for a moment, a shadow cast on the wall. You may fight the shadow, plead with it, try to shape it, fear it, or ask someone to remove it. But none of that touches the shadow at all. When you turn toward the light, the shadow dissolves without struggle. It is not removed by effort. It is replaced by recognition. So it is with the conditions in your life. They are shadows of consciousness. And when you turn toward the light of truth, they lose all substance and melt away in the presence of what is real. When you practice recognition, you are not trying to change the condition. That is seeking second. You are beholding the truth of God's presence where the condition appears to be. You are acknowledging spirit in the midst of the appearance. And that simple act, quiet, still, sincere, opens the way for the infinite invisible to reveal itself. This is why Goldsmith insisted that spiritual healing is never the changing of the body, but the changing of consciousness about the body. When consciousness shifts, the appearance follows. You must understand, recognition is not a technique, it is not a method to get results. The moment you use it to change something, you fall back into request. Recognition is the acceptance of what already is. It is the release of all effort. It is the resting in divine completeness. And it is from this resting that harmony unfolds. Not because you made it happen, but because truth expresses itself when you stop interfering with it. When you move from request to recognition, you transition from trying to live a spiritual life to actually living one. And in that moment, you enter the true beginning of mystical realization. We now arrive at the heart of the spiritual life, the point at which truth moves from concept to experience, from belief to realization. It has been said that truth sets us free, but only realized truth, not intellectual truth, not memorized truth, not theological truth. Only the truth you experience within your own consciousness becomes the law of your being. And for this reason, Joel Goldsmith devoted his life to a single essential practice, the practice of the presence. Now, you must understand, the practice of the presence is not a technique in the human sense. It is not a formula to follow, nor a method to achieve results. It is the conscious turning of one's awareness toward the divine presence that is already within. It is the willingness to be still long enough for God to reveal himself. It is the shift from thinking about God to being aware of God. This is the essence of spiritual living. Let us walk together through this sacred process, not as steps to accomplish something, but as a gentle return to what has always been true. The first movement, ceasing all requests. The practice begins when you release the desire to make something happen. You sit quietly without asking, without pleading, without imagining outcomes. You are not here to gain anything, not here to improve anything, not here to manifest or attract or correct. You are here for one purpose only: to be present with the presence. When you stop asking, you create the space into which realization can enter. B. Turning awareness inward. Then you gently allow your attention to turn inward, not toward thoughts, not toward emotions, not toward the mind's commentary, but toward the awareness that witnesses all these things. You notice the silent observer behind the stream of thinking. You become conscious of consciousness itself. This turning inward is the doorway to the kingdom, for the kingdom is found not in thought but in awareness. You begin to sense a stillness that does not come from you but is you. C. Acknowledging the presence. Now, in that quiet, you make a simple, gentle acknowledgement, not an affirmation, not a repetition, but a recognition. You may say inwardly, God is here. I and the Father are one. The kingdom is within me now. Speak these not as words to believe, but as truth to behold. Let the inner ear listen. Let the heart respond. These statements are not trying to make truth true. They lift the veil so you may perceive what has always been true. D. Resting in silence. And then you rest. You do nothing. You hold no intent. You seek no sign. You simply remain present to presence. This is where the mind may try to intrude, but you need not resist it. Thoughts may appear, but they have no authority. They are like waves passing over the surface of an unmoving ocean. Beneath them is the stillness of God. As Goldsmith would say, be still and let God announce himself. E. Returning gently. When the mind wanders, if the mind wanders into fear, memory, planning, or analysis, simply notice it without judgment and return your attention to the inner presence, not forcefully, not with frustration, but as one returning to a beloved friend. Each return strengthens recognition. Each return deepens awareness. Each return silences a lifetime of outward seeking. F. Allowing, not forcing. At this point, something begins to happen, not through your effort, but through your surrender. A subtle shift, a softening, a sense of peace that does not come from external conditions. This is the activity of the infinite invisible. This is the presence revealing itself. You are not causing it, you are allowing it. And this allowing is the essence of spiritual living. G. Realizing the nature of prayer. In this state, prayer is no longer request, it is communion. You are not talking to God, you are feeling God. Not asking for answers, but resting in the one who is the answer. Not seeking signs, but abiding in the presence from which all signs arise. This is the prayer that heals, the prayer that supplies, the prayer that harmonizes, not because it changes the outer world, but because it reveals the truth of the inner world. H. Carrying the presence into daily life. And when you rise from this silence, you do not leave the presence behind. You carry it into actions, conversations, decisions, challenges. You pause before reacting. You listen inwardly before speaking. You acknowledge God before engaging with the world. This transforms ordinary moments into sacred ones. It is not the length of the practice that matters, but its sincerity. For even a minute of realized presence can change the atmosphere of an entire day. This, my friends, is the practice of the presence. Not a technique, but a way of being. Not a ritual, but a life lived from the awareness of the kingdom within. And the more you rest in this inner realization, the more you discover that God is not something you find, God is what you awaken to. Let us now explore a truth that stands at the center of all spiritual demonstration, a truth so simple that the human mind almost always overlooks it. The outer world, your health, your finances, your relationships, your circumstances, is not the cause of your experience. It is the effect of your state of consciousness. You are not living in a world that acts upon you. You are living in a world that reflects you. And because of this, the moment consciousness changes, the outer conditions must, by law, conform to the new recognition. This is why Goldsmith declared again and again, consciousness is cause, appearance is effect, and until this truth is understood, one will continue to wrestle with shadows, treating conditions as though they possess power. But when you realize that every condition is but the projection of a belief, of fear, or a recognition of truth, you step into the realm of spiritual authority, not authority over people or things, but authority over the illusion that anything external can govern your life. Consider this. The moment you recognize the presence within, fear loses its foundation. The moment fear dissolves, the body relaxes, the mind clears, and the circumstances that once seemed threatening begin to shift. You did not force the change, you revealed the truth, or take supply. When you recognize God as the infinite substance of your being, the belief in lack disappears. And when that belief dissolves, opportunities, ideas, resources, and channels of good begin to appear, not because you summoned them, but because the obstruction was removed. Consciousness always expresses itself according to its nature. You must never believe that your spiritual practice manipulates outer things. It does not. It simply removes the inner resistance that prevented harmony from flowing. The tree does not strain to bear fruit. The flower does not exert itself to bloom. The sun does not labor to rise. They reveal what they already are. And so it is with you. The moment you rest in the awareness of the presence, life unfolds naturally, effortlessly, without the tension that comes from trying to control appearances. Joel Goldsmith often said, "The outer picture is not the power. The power is the realized truth behind it. When truth is realized, the picture changes of itself." This is why the great masters healed without effort, supplied without struggle, and lived without fear. They understood that the outer world has no authority independent of consciousness. They understood there is no power in the condition to maintain itself once the truth of being is recognized. Let us be clear. Harmony does not come because God intervenes. Harmony appears because the presence that was always within you becomes consciously realized. Discord dissolves because it never had reality in spirit. It was only the temporary projection of a mistaken belief. When the belief goes, the appearance collapses. You are not changing reality, you are correcting perception. Think of it this way. If you wipe the lens of a camera, the picture becomes clear, not because the scene changed, but because your perception of it did. In the same way, the practice of the presence wipes the lens of consciousness. It removes fear, belief, duality, and separation. And as the lens clears, the world you see begins to reflect the clarity within. This is why your life transforms without strain, because you are no longer trying to repair the mirror, you are tending to the face that stands before it. When consciousness is illumined, the mirror of experience reveals that illumination. When consciousness rests in truth, the world responds with peace. When consciousness abides in the presence, circumstances begin to align themselves with divine order. You must not look for signs. You must not measure results. Simply abide in recognition and let the infinite invisible fulfill its own activity. For as you dwell in the realization of God as the only presence, the only power, the only life, everything that appears in your experience will bear witness to that realization. This is the mystery of spiritual living. Nothing is forced, nothing is manipulated, nothing is controlled. Life unfolds from within, and the outer world becomes the natural, effortless expression of the consciousness you have allowed to reveal itself. Now, let us consider how this recognition, this awareness of the presence, takes form in the movements of daily living. For spiritual realization is not confined to moments of meditation. It is not something you visit briefly in the morning and abandon once the affairs of the day begin. No, spiritual living is a continuous awareness, a quiet remembering, a gentle abiding in the truth of God's nearness. The practice is not complete until it is carried into the very places where you once felt fear, anxiety, conflict, or confusion. It is here, precisely here, that recognition must become your foundation. Many imagine that spiritual life requires the withdrawal from activity, the retreat from responsibility, the avoidance of difficulty. But this is not so. The true test of realization is not what you experience in stillness, but the consciousness you carry into the ordinary moments when you wake, when you work, when you speak, when you respond to challenges. And so, let us see how recognition functions in the living of life. Before you check your phone in the morning, you pause. You remember, the kingdom is within me now. Before you respond to an email, you pause. You remember, God is the intelligence of this moment. Before you speak in a difficult conversation, you pause. You remember, the presence within me is the same presence within the one before me. These brief pauses, these quiet acknowledgments, are not interruptions in your day. They are the very substance of spiritual living. Joel Goldsmith called this practicing the presence not as a technique, but as a way of being. It is the steady recognition that there is an invisible activity going before you, preparing the way, harmonizing relationships, guiding decisions, unfolding supply, healing the body, and expressing itself as the fullness of your life. And when you acknowledge this, even for a moment, the anxiety that once governed you begins to dissolve. Life will still present challenges. Appearances will still come, but your response to them will be transformed. In the past, you reacted, you hurried, you feared, you planned from the mind. Now, you pause, you listen, you turn within, and from that inner stillness, an inspiration arises, not from personal effort, but from the infinite, invisible. This is the beginning of a life lived not from the human sense of self, but from the Christ within. What does this look like in practical terms? Suppose a bill arrives unexpectedly. The old reaction would have been fear, calculation, worry. But now you pause. You close your eyes briefly. You turn within and acknowledge God is the substance of all form. Supply is spiritual, not material. And in that moment, you withdraw the power you once gave to the appearance. You return to the truth. And from that truth, the outer circumstance begins to align. Or imagine a relationship filled with conflict. In the past, you might have argued, resisted, defended. Now you pause. You turn within and remember there is only one presence here. You are no longer meeting the personality of another. You are meeting the same divine presence that animates you. And from that recognition, words soften, reactions dissolve, and harmony becomes possible where it once seemed impossible. Or consider the body. When a symptom arises, the old way was to fear, to analyze, to treat the symptom as power, but now you turn within and acknowledge life is God. The body is the temple of the living Spirit. You are not trying to heal the body. You are remembering the truth of life itself. And in that remembrance, the appearance changes, not because you forced it, but because you no longer sustain the illusion of its power. This is what happens when recognition enters daily life. You stop seeking solutions in the world, and you begin to live from the inner foundation of truth. You become less reactive, more centered, more patient, more peaceful. Decisions become clearer, actions become inspired, relationships become gentler, circumstances lose their power to disturb you. You begin to sense an invisible rhythm, a divine harmony carrying you through the day. The entire world may rush, panic, strive, and compete, but you will move with a different consciousness because your awareness is no longer anchored in appearances. It is anchored in the presence that never leaves you. And as this recognition becomes natural, you will find that your life reflects a peace the world cannot give and cannot take away. This is the fruit of spiritual living, not perfection, not a life without challenges, but a life grounded in the unshakable realization that God is the only presence, the only power, the only reality, and that this truth is expressing itself through you in every ordinary moment of the day. We have traveled together through a great unfolding, a shift from outward seeking to inward recognition, from petition to presence, from fear of appearances to the realization of God as the only reality. And now, as we bring this time of sharing to its close, I want to speak to the deepest part of you, the part that has felt the stirring of truth, the quiet resonance that says, yes, this is the way. For this entire teaching has not been about adding something new to you. It has been about revealing what has always been true of you. You have not gained a truth, you have remembered one. You have not discovered a new God, you have recognized the God who has lived within your own consciousness from the beginning. And you have not been invited into a spiritual path of effort or striving. You have been invited into a way of being that is natural to your soul. You have spent years asking God to fix your life, and now you begin to see why nothing changed in any lasting way, because God does not fix appearances. God reveals reality. God does not alter the picture on the screen. God awakens you to the light that dissolves the illusion of the picture. And once you understand this, your entire approach to life shifts from fear to trust, from effort to rest, from seeking second to seeking first. I want you to hear this clearly. Your transformation has already begun. It began the moment something within you responded to truth. It began when you realized that the kingdom is within you. It began when you sensed even faintly the presence that does not come and go. It began when you felt the peace that arises not from improved circumstances, but from the recognition of God as the substance of your being. You do not need to perfect this practice. You do not need long hours of meditation. You do not need to force stillness. You need only a sincere willingness to remember to pause, to turn within, to acknowledge God before the mind rushes to meet appearances. One moment of genuine recognition outweighs many hours of mental striving. One breath of realized presence can do more than a lifetime of petitionary prayer. And so, as you leave this teaching and return to the flow of your day, know this. You are not going back to the old way of living. You cannot. For once truth has been recognized, even dimly, it begins to work within you. It begins to dissolve the patterns that once held you captive. It begins to shift the foundation from which you meet the world. And it begins to express itself as peace, as clarity, as harmony, as supply, as healing, not because you pursued these things, but because you sought the kingdom first. Let this be your quiet commitment, not an effort, but a remembrance. Before you respond, pause. Before you fear, turn within. Before you judge, acknowledge the presence. Before you analyze, recognize the truth. Before you seek solutions in the world, seek first the kingdom. This simple remembering will open doors you could never open through effort. It will reveal answers you could never reach through thought. It will lift you into a consciousness in which life unfolds with grace rather than strain. And as this awareness deepens, you will discover the meaning of the Master's promise. All these things shall be added unto you, but they are added not because you ask for them. They are added because you have discovered the source from which they flow. So I say to you now, rest in the presence, trust the invisible, live from the kingdom within, and let the truth you have recognized today become the quiet light that guides every step of the path before you.